Welcome back to Business Break. Today, we're going to be talking about privacy and what obligations a business has with respect to privacy of its employees and customers' information. People are becoming increasingly concerned about the privacy of their personal information, and Alberta has specific privacy laws that apply to how organizations collect, use, and disclose personal information. And in today's presentation, we're going to give you a brief overview of these laws. So the purpose today is to give you a brief overview of the obligations under the Personal Information Protection Act of Alberta, or what we sometimes refer to as PIPA. It's going to give you a basic rundown of who the Act applies to and what the Act requires with respect to collection and disclosure of personal information. We'll also provide you with some basic information as to how you can create a privacy policy for your business in order that you can remain in compliance with this Act. The information that we're providing here today, it's general in nature and should not be used to address any specific privacy concerns. If you do have any questions arising from the information that's provided, please do not hesitate to contact us directly. So PIPA is Alberta's privacy law for the private sector, and PIPA applies to organizations such as incorporated or unincorporated businesses, trade unions, partnerships, sole proprietorships, and to any persons that are acting for those entities as agents or contractors. There are also some specific sections of the Act that deal with nonprofit organizations and professional regulatory organizations. PIPA does not apply to public bodies. They're governed by the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, which we sometimes refer to as FOIP. That act, FOIP, applies to government departments, universities, public school boards, hospitals, and municipalities. And nor does PIPA apply to personal information that's used for family or home purposes. So just an overview of your obligations according to PIPA. PIPA generally provides for the protection of an individual's personal information, which is defined in the Act as information about an identifiable individual. It includes, for example, an individual's name, address, phone number, email address, a photograph of the individual, a video recording, or the individual's educational qualifications or salary. The Act seeks to try and balance an individual's right to have his or her personal information protected and the organization's need to collect, use, and disclose personal information for certain reasonable purposes. PIPA also gives individuals the right to access the personal information that an organization does have about them and to ask for corrections to be made to that personal information where they believe there's been a mistake. Unless PIPA states otherwise, an organization is required to get consent in order to collect personal information from someone other than the individual that the information is about, to use that personal information, or to disclose that personal information. There are three ways in which an individual can consent. They can do so with express consent, implied consent, or consent by not opting out. Express consent is where the individual has consented either in writing or verbally expressly to the collection and use or disclosure of the personal information. Implied consent is when an individual doesn't actually give written or verbal consent, but volunteers the information for an obvious purpose. And a reasonable person looking at that volunteering of the information would think that it was appropriate in the situation to volunteer that information, and that the organization would then have a right to accept that information or to use it for a certain reasonable purpose. For an example, if an individual provides information in an employment application, the organization, it would be reasonable for them to think that they can use that information for certain employment purposes. In some situations, an individual can be given the choice to opt out of the collection, use, or disclosure of information. And if they do not opt out, he or she is deemed to have provided consent. PIPA also has limits on an organization's ability to collect, use, and disclose personal information only for purposes that are reasonable and only to the extent that it's reasonable for carrying out those purposes. What is reasonable is determined by asking what a reasonable person would think is appropriate in the circumstances. So for example, would a reasonable person think the use of this kind of information is appropriate for the specific purpose? It would likely be reasonable that an employer who has collected an employee's social insurance number can use that information in issuing the employee a T4 or otherwise providing information to the CRA pertaining to the employment of that individual. It would likely not be reasonable for an employer to use an employee's social insurance number for other purposes, like running a credit check without the employee specifically consenting to that specific use. Before or at the time of collecting information or collecting personal information from an individual, an organization must let the individual know the purposes for which they're collecting the information and provide contact information for a person that the individual can contact if they have questions about the collection of the information. If you use standard forms or online forms that request information, the document should address the collection of the information or direct the individual to the your business's privacy policy, which should include information about your collection and use of personal information. An organization may then only use and disclose personal information for the purposes that are identified in the notice provided to the individual. There are some special rules in PIPA that apply in the case of personal employee information and in business transactions. With respect to employees, an organization may collect, use, and disclose personal employee information without consent for reasonable purposes that are related to recruiting, managing, or terminating personnel. An employee in these circumstances is someone who is employed by the organization or someone who performs a service for the organization. And it could include an apprentice, a volunteer, work experience, or a co-op student, or an individual who's acting in a contractor or agent position. Personal employee information is defined as personal information that's reasonably necessary to establish, manage, or end a work or volunteer work relationship. It does not include personal information that is not related to that relationship. An organization can also collect, use, and disclose personal information without consent for the purpose of a business transaction. A business transaction is defined as relating to a change in ownership of a business and includes the purchase, sale, lease, merger, an amalgamation, acquisition, or disposal of an organization or part of an organization, or any other business activity or related to that organization in the specific transaction. This provision can assist buyers of a business or part of a business to be able to carry out due diligence about the acquisition target. PIPA also gives rights to individuals. Individuals have the right to ask for access to his or her own personal information that is contained in a record that an organization maintains. Further, an individual who believes that there is an error or a mistake in his or her personal information may ask the organization to correct that error or mistake. There are specific requirements in PIPA that address how an organization should process a request of this nature, including how the individual should make the request, the duty that the organization has to assist the individual, the time limit in which the organization needs to respond, and the contents of that response. PIPA also contains a requirement that the organization maintain accuracy and protection and retention of the records that it collects. An organization needs to take reasonable steps to ensure that the personal information that is collected is used only for the specific purposes that it's collected, and if it's disclosed that the information is accurate and correct, or accurate and complete. An organization must also use reasonable safeguards, whether those be physical safeguards, administrative, or technical safeguards, to protect the personal information that it collects. An organization may retain personal information only for as long as the individual has or reasonably requires that the personal information for the legal or business purpose that it was created. After that point in time, those records need to be destroyed.
In order to ensure compliance with the Act, PIPA requires organizations to do two things. The first is to designate one or more individuals to make sure that the organization follows the rules in PIPA. The designated individual may also be the contact person for answering questions about the Act and for taking access requests and complaints under the Act. Other individuals in your organization, however, may be delegated to act in the place of the designated individual. The second requirement is to develop and put into practice policies that protect personal information and that are reasonable for the organization to meet its obligations under PIPA. So essentially, every organization needs a designated individual and a privacy policy to ensure compliance with PIPA. Now I'm just going to go over a few basics of what every organization should include in their privacy policy. Your privacy policy should cover what personal information you collect, the purposes for the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information, how you obtain consent for collecting, using, and disclosing personal information, how you then use and disclose personal information, how you ensure that adequate security measures are in place, how you retain and then dispose of personal information, how you will process access requests, and how you will respond to inquiries and complaints. That's it for today's segment of Business Break. Thanks for tuning in. If your business has any questions about its privacy obligations or needs help crafting a privacy policy, feel free to contact Tamara or myself.